It's honestly been a while since I sat down and recorded a Spotify episode, but I wanted to change that. I literally just got a comment on my YouTube about turning one of my videos into a Spotify episode, and I realized I have been unfortunately neglecting this part of my community, but I want to do it a little bit differently this time. So, let's catch up. I, you know, realized one thing lately is that I do miss this. I miss just kind of sitting down, talking, um, and sharing what God has been teaching me without trying to fit everything into a 60-second video. So, my goal moving forward is to post here at least once a week. I don't know exactly what each episode is going to look like, but I think I want this to become a place where I can just invite you into whatever season I'm currently walking through and just share with you guys what God is doing in the middle of it. So, if you're new here, a lot has changed. My family and I, we recently moved to Texas. We still have our home in Florida. So, we haven't completely left, but for now, we have been living here while we figure out what this next chapter looks like. Moving here was not just a random decision. It was actually one of the first really big decisions that we've had to make, that I've also had to make, since genuinely surrendering my life to Christ, where I felt like I needed to seek God first because I didn't want to force anything. My husband had a new job opportunity that would require me um, to leave my job full time. And I wasn't comfortable making a decision that big without praying through it. I felt like God was leading us here, and I was really excited. We actually talked about moving to Texas since 2022 after we visited Austin for my birthday, and we just fell in love with it. There are so many things that appealed to us, especially thinking about raising our daughters here someday, the homeschool community, the opportunities, um, you know, just the lifestyle mixed with so much to do, even though I genuinely love our home in Florida and we don't plan on selling it, it just still felt like God was opening another door. And I thought I knew what this season was going to look like. I was really excited. And then we got here. Instead of immediately settling into a home, we lived in an RV near Belton Lake for a while. Um, and now we're temporarily in a hotel while we continue looking for where God is leading us next. And if I'm being honest, this season has been one of the hardest seasons that I've experienced in years. Um, the RV life isn't terrible. There are actually a lot of parts that I loved. It actually forced us all outside. At home in Florida, I had become incredibly comfortable. I think looking back, I had just kind of slowly become a bit of a hermit crab. I worked from home, I stayed inside a lot. My girls, you know, they played outside, but I, usually found myself behind a computer or inside the house. Living in the RV just really changed that like overnight. We were walking constantly. The girls got to spend hours outside. There's so many deer here, and we watched so many sunsets over the lake, and we just really got to slow down in ways that I didn't expect. But it also challenged every comfortable routine that I had. Every single thing required me to adapt. Simple things were not simple anymore. Storage was different. Cooking was different. Doing laundry, washing dishes, having personal space, all of that, it looked now suddenly different. And it was just one long lesson in learning how to adapt. And As I'm sitting here, I look back. I don't think that moving to Texas has been the main story. I think that this move was really just a backdrop because the real story has been what God has been doing inside of me while everything around me has been changing. And I just sort of realized that almost every lesson that God has been teaching me, um, it really could be traced back to one central thing because I was really thinking about it. And I guess the best way that I can explain it is that he has been dismantling the version of me that just kind of quietly believed that peace came from stability. There's, and that's just so much more than simply saying that he's been teaching me patience. Because I was, just writing it all down, all of the things that I've been learning. And I had to really think about it because before Texas, there were so many things supporting my sense of security without me even realizing it. I had my home, my routine, my job. I knew where everything belonged. I had my close friends nearby. I knew what tomorrow would look like. I had my office. It was all familiar. And, it's not wrong, of course. They're all gifts from God, of course. But when all of them disappeared, literally at once, I realized how much of my peace had just became really attached to them. And I just had to kind of learn like sometimes God doesn't remove bad things. Sometimes he temporarily removes good things just to ask one question. Am I still enough when those gifts aren't available? And this question, man, it's literally followed me this entire season. And I've just kind of been thinking about recently is just like how different this calling has looked than what I imagined it would look like. Because I always prayed that God would use me somehow. I wanted my life to matter. I knew I wanted to help people. I wanted him to use whatever gifts he had given me. And then, almost immediately after praying those prayers, my life became incredibly small externally, like so small externally, while my ministry just became so much bigger internally. It's the opposite of what I imagined. And I was just thinking about it. Like, we usually assume that if God is expanding our purpose, then everything around us is going to expand too. Like bigger opportunities, bigger income, bigger platform, bigger house. But my physical world, it just became incredibly small. You know, RV, no office, no church community yet, no close friends nearby. I've been in almost complete isolation, and somehow, spiritually, this has been probably the biggest season of growth that I've ever experienced in my entire life, which is such a strange paradox. And I've just come to learn that, like, sometimes God shrinks your environment so that your attention just stops scattering in 20 different directions. And, I do think that this season has just exposed the difference between my dependence on Him and my control. Because before this move, whenever something felt uncertain, there was usually something like practical that I could do. Work harder, make another plan, pick up another project, figure it out, solve the problem. And this season, it has not allowed that. There have been so many moments where I have just literally done everything that I know how to do, and then I just have to stop. And I just have to actually surrender and let it begin. And I think before this, I had so many moments of surrender that was just kind of like, these beautiful emotional moments where, I raise my hand and I tell God that I trust him. But here, surrender, It genuinely just looks like waking up the next morning after you cry yourself to sleep and you choose to obey anyway. One of the biggest breakdowns that I had while we were living in the RV, I was crying harder than I had cried in a long time. I was really frustrated. I was confused. I was angry. And I was outside, sitting on the swinging bench in the middle of the night. Everyone's asleep, overlooking this lake in almost complete darkness. And I was begging God to tell me what He meant years ago when He first revealed Himself to me. And I kept asking Him, what did you mean? What are you doing? What is the plan? Why won't you just tell me? If you've called me into something, then what is it? I wanted specifics. I wanted direction and clarity. I wanted Him to tell me what was coming. And instead, He was just quiet. I didn't get an answer. I didn't get any sort of revelation. And it's just been one of the hardest parts of this season because this is the quietest God has ever felt to me. And I know intellectually He did not abandon me. I know He did not stop leading me. I just don't feel like He's been speaking with the same kind of clarity that I experienced earlier in my walk with Him. So I went to bed that night crying, and I woke up the next morning and nothing changed. There was not any dramatic revelation waiting for me. There wasn't a dream. I didn't get an answer. There wasn't anyone calling me with exactly the words that I had been praying for. My circumstances were exactly the same. But the invitation was also exactly the same. Be faithful today. And I realized that faith, it's never proven by how you respond when God gives you constant reassurance. It's almost always revealed by what you do when heaven feels quiet. There's still a lot of days where I cry. There's a lot of days where I ask if God is even pleased with me. Some people tell me that I'm anointed, and I really do appreciate that encouragement genuinely. And I've told God before, Lord, but you haven't told me that. And I don't want to claim something that you haven't personally confirmed. And I think people assume that because I teach the Bible or because I encourage people online that I just wake up every day and I'm full of confidence. I don't. I have a lot of moments where I question myself. I wonder a lot if I'm saying the right things. I wonder if I'm representing Him well. I ask Him a lot if He's pleased with how I'm doing all of this, if I'm following Him correctly. And I think that they just genuinely come from wanting to honor Him well. And maybe that's another thing this wilderness season has been teaching me. Following Jesus almost never eliminates your questions. It just changes where you bring them. And one thing that has kept me going more than I can explain has been the testimonies that people have shared with me. It's honestly incredible how often those messages arrive at exactly the moments that I need the most. I'll have a day where I'm questioning everything, wondering if I should even keep making videos, wondering if anything I'm saying is actually helping anyone. And then someone sends me a message explaining how something I shared pointed them back to Jesus, or helped them in their marriage, or encouraged them through their depression, or gave them hope, and just reminded them that God didn't forget about them. I think those moments have just kind of felt like little reminders from God, because I think maybe He's just kind of quietly showing me that obedience is producing fruit that I can't always see. And I've just also learned, something that I never expected about ministry is that when I was working full time, I kept telling myself that I couldn't really start the teachings that I wanted to do on YouTube until I had the perfect setup. That I needed the right camera, the right microphone, the right lighting and intro and perfect office. And then God placed me somewhere that removed every single excuse because I literally had none of it. At least at my home, I could have worked towards that. I had all of those things. But here, I just have my phone. I have my phone and a computer and a willingness to keep talking about what he was teaching me. And ironically, that's when the ministry started to grow. And that lesson just sort of stayed with me because I think so many of us delay obedience just waiting for ideal circumstances. And I just sort of realized, as I study the Bible, God rarely waits for perfect conditions. Moses, he had a staff. David had a sling. God just loved always using ordinary things to accomplish really extraordinary purposes. And I think that this season has just, really quietly reshaped my identity because when you leave a state, you know, you don't just leave a location. Sometimes you leave versions of yourself. And for me, I was leaving routines and roles and comfort and predictability and just pieces of my identity that had been formed around what I did every day. And when all of that disappears, you're left with a question that can feel really uncomfortable. Who am I when all the familiar things are gone? I think that's one of the reasons God uses wilderness seasons so much in scripture, because that is literally where he forms identities. While we're learning that being his is enough. I've also realized that what looked like loneliness at first has just kind of become something different. Because I don't think this season is really about being lonely. I think it's more about discovering what it reveals. Because now, as I sit here with my thoughts, everything gets quiet. Whatever's already inside of you just gets louder. My fears got louder. My insecurities got louder. My hopes, all of it, it just got louder. And I just sort of realized like, if you allow it, God's voice becomes also easier to hear too, because there are fewer distractions now competing for your attention. And it makes sense why God does introduces wilderness seasons, because that is genuinely where some of the deepest work has been done, because there are just fewer distractions. I've noticed how much my prayers have changed. Earlier in my walk with God, so much of my prayers um, were always about changing my circumstances. And now I'm just asking God, like, don't let me waste this season. If you brought me here, then don't let me miss what you're trying to teach me. I do still pray for breakthrough and for provision and clarity, but more than anything, I don't want to leave this wilderness unchanged. Because if God is allowing this season, then I want everything He intends to produce through it. You know, I recently started studying the Psalms just on my own. And one of the things that I'm learning about David is that he never pretended that his circumstances weren't hard. He poured everything out to God. Questions, he grieved, he cried, but eventually he always returned to God's character. And I realize that's exactly what I've been learning too, you know? Because circumstances, they have this way of preaching their own sermons. Financial uncertainty, it tells you one story. Delayed answers, it tells you another. Loneliness tells you something else. But God's character has to become the louder voice. And I've just been learning to interpret my circumstances through who God has already proven himself to be instead of interpreting God through whatever my circumstances happen to be saying to me that day. And I do feel like it's helping me. Um, I do want to share something else that's become part of this season. I recently started offering one on one private faith conversations. I even hesitate to call them coaching because they honestly just kind of feel more like sitting across from someone and walking through life together while pointing each other back to scripture. And the reason I started doing them is because of the conversations that were already happening behind the scenes. People were reaching out with questions about grief and anxiety and identity and waiting on God and just rebuilding their faith. And I realized that sometimes people don't need another video. They need someone to sit with them and listen and ask good questions and pray with them and help them keep their eyes on Christ. And if that is something that you ever feel would encourage you, I would love to walk alongside you for that season. Thank you for listening today. If you made it all the way to the end, I hope one thing can encourage you. Because maybe you're in your own wilderness right now. Maybe God feels really quiet and you've been waiting for answers that haven't come yet. Maybe you're wondering if somehow you've taken a wrong turn. But I just want you to know that maybe He's teaching us to trust His character more than His explanations. I don't know exactly what God is doing in this season of my life yet. If I'm honest, I still have a lot of questions. I'm still walking by faith, I'm still taking one step at a time. I'm still learning. But I can honestly say that even though this has been one of the hardest seasons of my life, I also think it's becoming one of the holiest. And so, if you'd like to continue walking through scripture with me, I'd love to invite you over to my YouTube channel. That's where I post all my Bible studies. We've just been slowly walking chapter by chapter through the Bible together, and it's just become one of my favorite parts of the week. Whether you're brand new to reading scripture or you've been studying it for years, I would love to have you join us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week.